There is a gap in the way you understand quantum, and you feel it every time you try to make life make sense. Every time your chest tightens and you tell yourself reality is supposed to listen. You were taught that an observer means your consciousness, like your mind is the final switch that decides what becomes real. You were taught that if you focus hard enough, probability obeys you, and the universe rewards belief like a currency. You were taught that your awareness collapses reality, but what exactly is doing the observing in you? If observer means consciousness, then explain this to yourself without performing a magic trick. How does an experiment keep existing when no one is looking at it, when no one is thinking about it, when no one is holding it in their mind like a candle in the dark? Because the problem was never the double slit. The problem was a word, a label. A single term that got smuggled out of physics or polished until it sounded mystical and then handed back to you as proof that you are the center of reality. You were not given a mechanism, you were given a translation error. Observation, in ordinary language, sounds intimate. It sounds like eyes. It sounds like awareness. It sounds like you. And your mind loves that. It loves the idea that the universe is waiting for your attention the way a stage waits for a spotlight. So the meaning slides. Quietly. And first it's observation as a way of speaking. Then it becomes consciousness as a thing. And then it becomes consciousness controls as a conclusion. Not because anything new happened in the world, but because something shifted inside a sentence. Not metaphorically, linguistically. And this is why so many videos don't teach you physics. They teach you permission. They teach you how to sanctify a belief by borrowing a scientific word and wearing it like a robe. And they teach you how to say quantum with a straight face and feel superior to doubt. Now pause. And the moment you notice that slide, you regain something they never meant to give you, the ability to separate wonder from certainty. You can still feel awe without turning awe into an absolute claim. If a belief can be built on a semantic slide, it can be defended the same way. It can dodge every counterexample. It can blame every failure on your focus. It can turn every contradiction into, you didn't observe it right. And that is not power. That is insulation. Here is the uncomfortable part. There have been interpretations offered where a collapse story is used to explain claims about certain double-slit style setups. And in that framing, human consciousness is treated as if it plays a special role in what becomes definite. And that is literally where the phrase quantum consciousness gets invoked, inside that interpretive move, not as a stamped certificate of truth, as a choice of story about what observation means. Do you feel the difference? One is a label that points to a process. The other is a throne you sit on. And once you confuse the two, you start hearing noise as signal. You start turning the dial on the wrong device and insisting the broadcast is broken. Then your brain becomes a radio with the volume cranked to emotion, and every coincidence starts sounding like a message. You feel tension in your body and you call it energy. You feel uncertainty and you call it collapse. You feel the need to be certain, and you call it physics. But physics doesn't care what you call it. This is not spirituality. This is not mysticism. This is mechanics, of language, of meaning, of how a mind protects the stories it wants to keep. Inside the same mouth, Yao observer can mean measurement in one breath and my soul in the next. And you don't even notice the switch, because it feels good, because it gives you the missing link you were desperate for. A way to believe reality is personal, and that is where everything begins to crack. Because once you change the definition of observer, you can change the definition of anything. You can change the definition of responsibility. You can change the definition of effort. Now you can change the definition of what counts as evidence. You can live inside words instead of inside results, not because you are weak, because you were taught to confuse poetry for proof. You didn't believe this because you were stupid. You believed it because the story was engineered for the exact weakness of the human mind. It prefers a meaningful cause over a thin signal. It prefers a single lever over a complicated system. It prefers "I did this" over "I don't know." So here is where the viral narrative actually starts. Not in philosophy, in a very specific kind of double-slit style claim that gets repeated like scripture. In that setup, people aren't just watching a screen. They are guided through timed periods where they are instructed to direct attention toward the apparatus, and then through timed periods where they are instructed to withdraw attention and relax. And the claim attached to that rhythm is simple and intoxicating, that a tiny reduction in interference intensity tracks the state of attention. That's the hook. That's the promise. And the entire internet builds a cathedral on top of it. Now pause, because the number that gets smuggled in next is so small that it feels like it must be pure. It feels like it must be beyond ordinary explanation. The reported effect size sits around 0.001%, 1,000th of 1%. That is not a thunderclap. That is a dust mote under a microscope. And the moment you accept a dust mote as a doorway, you stop asking the questions that keep science honest. And when people hear a number that small, they don't get cautious, they get romantic. They assume the universe is whispering. They assume the signal is sacred. And that romance is how reasoning learns to speak equations. 0.001% sounds scientific. It sounds like precision. But it is also the exact zone where statistical illusion starts to masquerade as miracle, where the human mind can't feel the difference between a real signal and a pattern generated by the way you measure, the way you slice, the way you search, the way you interpret. And this is where the language gets dangerous, because the claim is radical. It isn't attention changes your mood. It isn't focus changes your behavior. It is a claim about consciousness affecting light intensity in an interference pattern. And when you pair a radical claim with an ultra-weak effect, you don't get certainty. You get a demand for discipline. But that is not what goes viral. What goes viral is the tone, the posture, the vocabulary that makes doubt sound like ignorance. When they say words like reproducible, they say significant, they say 2 sigma. And if you don't live inside statistics, those words land like prophecy, like a stamp, like permission to stop thinking and start believing, not metaphorically, mechanically. Because 2 sigma isn't a halo, it's a threshold someone chooses to treat as persuasive. And in this particular story, a z-score on the order of 2 sigma is taken and held up as meaningful evidence. And that is the moment the narrative flips from "we observed a tiny change" into "we proved the mind reaches into matter." And your nervous system loves that flip because it removes ambiguity. It gives you a lever. It gives you a way to feel powerful when life feels random. It turns uncertainty into a villain and attention into a weapon. So here's the question you cannot avoid. If an effect has to be that thin to be seen at all, what do you do to make sure you're not just watching the measurement system watch itself? What do you do to make sure the apparatus isn't generating the pattern you're calling consciousness? What do you do to make sure you didn't mistake a methodological shadow for a metaphysical revelation? Because you don't need to hate anyone for this. You don't need to mock it. You just need to love the standard of verification more than you love the story that makes you feel chosen. But here's where the method matters. When you hear a radical claim paired with an ultra-weak effect, a red light should turn on inside you. Not because the claim is forbidden, not because the universe is boring, but because when you measure at the edge of what instruments can separate from noise, it becomes easy to mistake the method for the miracle. And that is the core question the critique forces you to sit with. If the implication is enormous, consciousness affecting physical outcomes, and the described effect is ultra-weak, then the first responsibility is not to romanticize the result. It is to ask with ruthless simplicity whether there are alternative explanations that do not require observer consciousness at all. statistical artifacts, systematic measurement bias, type 1 error, false positive, where the ordinary ways a complicated system can generate a pattern that looks meaningful when you want meaning badly enough. This is where the conversation stops being mystical and becomes mechanical, because you don't have to deny everything to be honest. You don't have to scoff. You don't have to perform cynicism. You simply have to interrogate the measurement itself. Ask what the apparatus could be doing. Ask what the analysis could be amplifying. Now ask what happens when tiny effects sit in the same numerical neighborhood as the quirks of the system that detects them. Now pause. The word quantum can feel like relief. It can feel like effort can be replaced by intention. But the standard that saves you is not a word. It is control. It is the willingness to admit that a beautiful story is not the same thing as a clean signal. And this is not a theoretical warning. The critique points to a cautionary tale from physics, the faster-than-light neutrino anomaly. For a time, an effect that looked real, small, statistically strong, stood in the spotlight. And then it was traced back to bias in the system, not fraud, not delusion, measurement bias, the kind that hides in plain sight precisely because the result feels too precise to doubt. Do you feel the lesson? When your effect is tiny, your humility must be enormous, because at the edge, noise can cosplay as truth. The apparatus can generate a signature that looks like a discovery. A calibration detail can become a worldview. A systematic drift can become a gospel. And if you don't have the temperament to suspect that first, you will start building beliefs on signals that are smaller than your confidence. Not metaphorically, physically. And here is where it gets even deeper. You do not need anyone to lie for a false positive to appear. You do not need a villain. You do not need a conspiracy. You only need a system that is complex, sensitive, and just slightly imperfect, and a human mind that wants the outcome to mean something about who it is. That is the trap of the ultra-weak. Small, smaller, extremely small. Small enough that the line between there and not there starts to blur. Small enough that significance can become a seductive costume. Small enough that your brain begins to treat the output of a measurement as if it were a direct whisper from reality, instead of a filtered estimate produced by a chain of assumptions. So you want the story, but you need the protocol. You want meaning, but you need control. You want to say consciousness is the key, but you have to earn that sentence by eliminating the ordinary reasons a system produces extraordinary-looking blips. And if you can't do that, well, then what you are calling quantum is not revealing the nature of reality. It is revealing the nature of your relationship with uncertainty. It is showing you how quickly you will crown a thin signal as a sovereign truth, just to escape the discomfort of not knowing. And if noise can masquerade as signal in a laboratory, it can masquerade as certainty in your mind and call it destiny. You can replicate an illusion. You can measure it. You can polish it into a graph. And then you can mistake that graph for reality because your body relaxes the moment it sees a number. This is where the critique becomes surgical. It describes a commissioned replication, and inside that replication, there is a sham condition, a mirror, a check, a way to see whether the system itself can manufacture the very thing you think you've found. And the result is not comforting. The false positive detection rate in that sham condition reaches 50%. 50%. Not 5. Not 0.5%. 50. Now pause. Because that single number changes the posture of the conversation. If the same pipeline can announce effect when the condition is sham, then any claim of a true effect produced by that same pipeline does not get to stand on desire. It has to stand against suspicion until proven otherwise. Not because you are trying to kill wonder, because you are trying to keep wonder clean. And it gets sharper. Now, the critique doesn't just say false positives exist. It quantifies what was identified. A percent effect size for the false positive in the sham set D_M equals 0.0159%. And then it places that next to the ultra-weak scale celebrated in the consciousness narrative, an effect size around 0.001% that has been reported for an anomalous consciousness effect. Do you feel the inversion? You thought you were watching mind reach into photons, but you might have been watching the measurement system reach into itself. You might have been watching method generate a signature that looks like a revelation, simply because the signature is small enough to be treated as sacred, not metaphorically, mechanically. And here is the part that makes people uneasy. The statistical significance attached to that false positive can sit in the same general range as what gets presented as evidence for the true effect. That means significance. It by itself is not a priest. It cannot sanctify a conclusion, because the same stamp can land on the wrong thing when the system is sensitive and the effect is tiny. So the question is no longer, do you believe in consciousness? The question becomes, do you accept the standard of verification? Because once you see how easily a process can generate convincing outputs under sham conditions, you realize something sobering. Rerunning the experiment is not enough. You can rerun a bias. And you can reproduce an artifact. What matters is the architecture of the test. Confirmatory design, pre-specified choices, and controls strong enough to catch you when you start hearing noise as signal. This is the missing link for the modern mind. You want meaning, but you need control. You want a story that makes you central, but you need a method that makes you humble. And notice what happens inside you when you hear that. Your shoulders drop. Well, part of you wants to bargain. Maybe the sham was different. Part of you wants to rescue the story. That impulse is the same impulse that turns a whisper into a prophecy. It is the mind as a radio, twisting the dial until static sounds like guidance. The discipline is to stop touching the dial and ask once, what survives the check? A real mechanism doesn't need you to stare. It needs you to test. False positive. Artifact. That's the mechanism. And once you let that land, well, you can no longer speak as if consciousness collapses reality is an accepted conclusion. You can still explore. You can still wonder. But you do it with a spine, with a standard, with the willingness to let a beautiful belief die if it cannot survive sham. Because if false positive and true positive can look the same in a laboratory, then what you call quantum in your life can also be a mirror, reflecting your hunger for certainty back at you, dressed up as destiny. That is the standard, not inspiration. You think this argument is between science and spirituality. It isn't. It's between standards and desire, between what you want to be true and what you are willing to require before you let a sentence become a belief. Because when peer review steps in, it doesn't ask, is this inspiring? It asks, is this stable? It asks, is this specific? It asks, does the method protect us from our own hunger to see patterns? And in the language of that critique, the presence of a false positive effect is not a footnote. It is a signal about the posture you should take. Skepticism should replace optimism toward the radical claim that an anomalous quantum consciousness effect has been observed under laboratory conditions. Read that again, slowly, not maybe someday, not keep believing. Skepticism should replace optimism. Now pause, and the reason is brutally simple. If the source of the false positive has not been identified, or then the system has not earned your trust, which means any true positive claim produced by that same system must be regarded with considerable doubt until proven otherwise. Not because anyone is attacking hope, not because curiosity is illegal, because the method has already demonstrated that it can generate the thing you are celebrating when it shouldn't. This is where people get emotional, because it feels like something is being taken away. A beautiful story, a sense of specialness, when a shortcut out of uncertainty. And what you don't realize is that what you're being given back is stronger than the story. Discernment. the ability to hold awe in one hand and restraint in the other, the ability to stop turning the universe into a mirror for your needs. And if you still want to talk about the observer, then look at what even careful explanations keep reminding you. This experiment exists to challenge your intuition, not to grant you a license to write poetry and call it physics. The quantum version doesn't make the picture cleaner, it makes it fuzzier. It makes the debate about what is real feel less settled, not more. The point is not comfort. The point is confrontation with how easily the mind tries to force a clean story onto a messy world. So when someone tells you it's settled, consciousness collapses it. What they are really doing is selling you certainty, and certainty is addictive. When it makes your nervous system unclench, it makes you feel like you finally found the missing link. It makes you stop asking questions. But the standard doesn't care about your relief. In this paper, in this system, with these results, the conclusion goes only this far. The presence of false positives means caution is warranted, and optimism is not justified as a default posture. That's it. No grand metaphysics, no cosmic coronation, a boundary. And boundaries are not the enemy of mystery. Boundaries protect mystery from becoming a product. Because the moment you treat a fragile claim like a finished truth, you don't just jump over uncertainty in science. You build the habit of jumping over uncertainty in life. You start leaping from feeling to conclusion, from desire to doctrine, from tension in your body to a story about the universe. You start skipping the hard middle, the testing, the checking, the waiting, the humility, not spirituality, not cynicism, discipline. Or layer 1, a semantic slide. Layer 2, an ultra-weak effect. Layer 3, false positives that look persuasive. Layer 4, the standard that refuses to let persuasion masquerade as proof. So don't pick a team. Don't worship it. Don't dismiss it. Just demand the kind of rigor you would demand if your own life depended on it. And here is the final shift. Skepticism doesn't kill wonder. It keeps wonder clean. It keeps you from being manipulated by your own longing. It keeps you from calling a question an answer just because the answer feels good. And that is where this becomes personal. You weren't pulled in because you're naive. You were pulled in because you want certainty inside a world that refuses to hand it to you. And the double slit is the perfect stage for that hunger because it feels like a door, a simple door. 2 paths, 1 screen, 1 mystery. Your mind can almost touch it. But here's the part that matters. Even in careful, mainstream telling, the double slit has never been sold as a comfort blanket. Thomas Young's original version was used to show light behaves like a wave, and then the quantum versions didn't clean the story up. They made it fuzzier. They made the picture less intuitive, not more. They kept the debate about what is real alive, precisely because the experiment keeps violating the way your brain wants reality to behave. Now pause. That fuzziness is not a defect. It's the point. It's the confrontation. And when something confronts you like that, you have 2 options. You can develop the capacity to live with the hard question, or you can grab the first interpretation that makes you feel powerful again. That is why this experiment gets used to sell mysticism. Because when you can't tolerate ambiguity, you start turning metaphors into mechanisms. You start taking a phrase like the observer, and you don't just hear a description of interaction or measurement. Then you hear a cosmic role, a crown. You hear the universe whisper, "It's you." And your nervous system loves that because it turns confusion into control. But the cost of that control is honesty. Here is the deeper layer. The more unresolved something is, the easier it is to project your desire into it. The fuzzier the picture, the more room you have to paint. And the internet is not built to sit in fog. It is built to manufacture clarity. So it picks one storyline, puts it in a dramatic voice, and says, "This is what it means." Not "this is one way to think," not "this is still debated." It skips the discomfort and sells you the shortcut. And then you start living by that shortcut. But disciplined people don't do that. Disciplined people treat fuzziness like a signal to slow down, not speed up. They treat uncertainty like a reason to check the method, not inflate the meaning. They don't call the fog proof, they call it work. And that's why the critique matters as a counterweight. Because in the specific system being argued over, the measurement pipeline can generate false positives, strong enough to force skepticism, without anyone needing to be malicious. That is not a spiritual statement. That is a mechanical warning. If the system can make an effect appear when it shouldn't, then your story about what that effect means is built on sand. Well, so now the question becomes personal in a quieter way. When you hear quantum, do you feel your shoulders drop because you think responsibility just got outsourced to the universe? Do you feel relief because you think uncertainty has finally been defeated by a single phrase? Because that is the emotional hook these interpretations ride on, not physics, relief. And relief is not evidence. This is the missing link. Discipline with ambiguity. The willingness to say, I don't get to claim a final meaning just because the experiment feels profound. The willingness to let the picture stay fuzzy and still stay present. The willingness to keep wonder, while refusing to convert wonder into a declaration. Because the double slit doesn't exist to flatter you. It exists to challenge you. And if you use it to crown yourself, you are not learning reality. You are learning how to escape it. So here is the choice. Yeah, do you want an easy answer that calms you for a moment? Or do you want the capacity to hold a hard question without turning it into a fairy tale? This is where mastery begins. And this is where it becomes personal, because you don't use quantum to understand the world. You use it to escape the feeling of powerlessness when life doesn't move, when your efforts don't translate, when outcomes won't obey you. So you reach for a story where awareness is the lever, where reality is waiting, where the observer is you. And the moment you adopt that story, you inherit a loophole so elegant it feels like enlightenment. Because when things don't work, you never have to look at what is actually uncomfortable. You get to say, I didn't observe it correctly. You get to say, I wasn't focused enough. You get to say, my energy wasn't aligned. And notice what that does. It turns every contradiction into a ritual. It turns every failure into a technique. It turns your life into a laboratory where the only variable is your belief. That is not power. That is a ceremony. Now pause. Because a ceremony can feel like control. It can soothe your nervous system. And the deeper part is this. The ceremony is self-sealing. It cannot be disproven because the moment evidence appears against it, the belief rewrites the rule and blames you. If it works, it proves the story. If it doesn't, it still proves the story because you did it wrong. And this is why it's seductive. It makes you special. It makes you central. It lets you believe you're touching reality without ever having to touch yourself. So here is the question that exposes the mechanism. If consciousness is everything, why do you keep repeating the same choices? If awareness is the master key, why does your life still move in the same loops? And if you can collapse outcomes by intention, why does your body still tense when you face ordinary pressure? But here is where it gets even deeper. In a lab, a system can generate a false positive and convince you an effect is real when the condition is sham. Not because anyone is evil, because noise can dress up like signal, because sensitivity plus desire can manufacture meaning. And your mind is a system. Your mind can generate a false positive of meaning. It can make you feel like you're in control while you're avoiding responsibility. It can make you feel spiritual while you're sedating the sting of failure. It can make you feel as if you're influencing reality when what you're really doing is protecting identity. You want to be the kind of person who is chosen. And quantum gives you that costume. It gives you vocabulary to wrap around longing so it sounds like truth. Now listen carefully. When you use a myth to numb the feeling of falling short, and you call that numbness peace, You are not healing. You are freezing. Not metaphorically, mechanically. You are replacing action with interpretation. You are replacing discipline with language. You are replacing evidence with mood. And the most dangerous part is that it feels elevated. But cause and effect still owns your calendar. You say, I just need to believe. And I ask, quietly, what will you do the work when belief is boring? Because that is where coherence is forged. Not in vibes, but in repeated choices your nervous system can actually sustain, day after day. So the shift isn't to become less conscious. It's to become more honest about what consciousness is doing. Not bending physics, shaping behavior, directing attention toward what matters, interrupting the reflex to escape discomfort with a story. Because the real power of awareness is not in explaining the universe. It's in regulating you. It's in noticing the moment you want to outsource responsibility and choosing to stay present instead. It's in catching the ritual before it becomes your identity. It's in letting uncertainty exist without turning it into doctrine. And if that offends you, good. That means you just touched something real. If you want quantum to be genuinely useful, use it as a mirror, not as a wand. Because the wand makes you chase outcomes. The mirror makes you confront the mechanism inside you that decides whether you act or you escape. So here is the framework, not as a checklist, as a vow, as a way to stop borrowing language to avoid emotion. Layer 1 is recognition. The moment you notice yourself reaching for scientific-sounding words to cover something raw, fear, loss of control, the ache for meaning, you don't do it because you're bad. You do it because it feels safer to sound precise than to admit you're uncertain. That is a mechanism, the mechanism of avoidance. And it hides in plain sight because it dresses itself up as intelligence. Layer 2 is coherence. And coherence is not a feeling. It's alignment between what you say you believe and what you do when no one is clapping. It's the difference between staring at a possibility and building a pattern. Reality doesn't choose because you stare at it. Well, your life changes because you embody it, which means the work becomes almost offensively small but relentless. One honest action repeated until your nervous system learns, I am safe without the story. That is a mechanism too. The mechanism of behavior, not mystical, mechanical. Now pause. If you can't hold ambiguity, you will keep decorating it, and decoration will feel like progress, while nothing changes at all. Because this is where people get stuck. They want a grand gesture, and then they want the universe to respond to a mood. But coherence is quieter. It's waking up and doing the thing you said mattered yesterday. It's making one decision that removes friction instead of adding drama. It's letting your body feel discomfort without naming it destiny. This is the missing link, not more explanation, more consistency. And there is a reason I keep bringing you back to standards. In that critique, when the source of false positives has not been identified, our true positive claims should be regarded with considerable doubt until proven otherwise. That is not an insult. That is a boundary. It's a reminder that proven is not a vibe. So if you ever feel yourself saying, science has proven I can do this with my mind, stop, breathe, return to the limit. Layer 3 is identity, because identity is the deepest mechanism of all. Your beliefs are not just ideas. They are costumes you wear to protect a self-image. So, the shift is not, I'm waiting for reality to validate me. The shift is, I become the evidence. Not by arguing, by living in a way that makes your own mind undeniable to you. You stop being the person who needs the universe to comply, and you become the person who complies with their own word. Coherence, identity, embodiment. Say those words and feel what they demand. Coherence demands you stop performing certainty. Identity demands you stop outsourcing agency. And embodiment demands you stop calling intention a substitute for action. And if you want something practical, make it this. Each time you catch yourself reaching for a cosmic explanation, ask, do I want to be right, or do I want my life to be right? because being right is a dopamine hit. Living right is a practice. This is how you use quantum without turning it into superstition. You let it remind you that your mind is powerful, but not because it breaks physics, because it shapes attention. Because attention shapes behavior, because behavior shapes outcomes, because outcomes shape the story you live inside. And the final turn is simple. When you feel yourself sliding into the old myth, don't fight it with another myth. Interrupt the mechanism, choose one coherent action, then repeat it until your identity catches up. Write this in the comments. I don't borrow quantum to escape. I use coherence to become. So here is the closure. Consciousness as observer is not what this evidence earns. Mastery begins when you stop jumping. In the peer-reviewed critique, the presence of a false positive effect leads to one sober posture. Skepticism should replace optimism toward the radical claim that an anomalous quantum consciousness effect has been observed under laboratory conditions. Not to be cynical, not to be small, but to be precise. Because precision protects wonder from becoming a drug. And coherence turns awareness into results you can actually live inside, day after day. So if you want quantum to matter, don't demand the universe obey your attention. Demand coherence from yourself. Write in the comments, I choose standards over stories. Then take one aligned action today. This is the missing link, the discipline that makes your identity undeniable. And remember, you are the mechanism.